Okay guys, today we're going to be doing a drift review on this V8 powered FC3S Mazda RX-7. The FC3S is a sports car from Mazda. FC3S is the chassis code for those unfamiliar. This is an RX-7 though. This RX-7 originally came with a 13B rotary engine. That's a two-rotor engine. It was either naturally aspirated or turbocharged, making horsepower ranges about 140 to 200 if I remember correctly. But this one has a 5.0 V8 from a Mustang in it, Fox body era. I believe it's a Windsor V8 going through the 5-speed T5 that the Fox bodies came with originally. So we're gonna go drive this car, and just a quick run of mods. Like I said, it's got the Fox body. It's probably making around 250 to 300 wheel roughly. It's got a villain's angle kit, so cut knuckles, extended lower control arms, a hydraulic handbrake, stripped cage, and we're gonna go drive it and see what it's like.
Alright. Oh yeah, got some good power. Pump it a little because it's in line. Okay. This drives so different than my Z. Oh yeah. I don't know how to put into words. The way it slides though is just. If it starts to understeer, clutch kick. Okay. Yeah, you're good. Dude, this thing's fun.
Well, like once you kind of understand how it drives, I feel like it's pretty easy.
The rear end's a little more manipulatable. That's what I was feeling. Like the rear end, it might be a little easier to loop than like a Z, for example, but I'm able to like position the rear end better. Like it was way easier for me in this car to get to those rear zones than my Z. I had to really like calculate ahead of time. Yeah. But this car is way more manageable to kind of move it around in that fashion.
Yeah. So it's the way that I have it and the way that I like to drive it is a lot of throttle work.
Yeah. But yeah, no, the car was awesome. It felt good to place. I feel like maybe a little bit of a trade-off, at least comparing to my Z, is like you trade the ability to really place the rear end where you want it with a little bit of easier to spin it out and loop it, because I looped it once or twice.
Yeah.
But once I figured it out, like I felt like I could just get on those zones perfectly.
Yeah. Well, and most of the time with this, if you pop the clutch in, it'll pull itself back.
Yeah, the power was good, and then that's what I figured. Like kind of clutched in. Once power is off, the car will bring itself back. Yeah. So it's a really nice setup actually. Once you like really get intimate with it, I feel like you can do like a lot with the car and just like really manipulate your line, your driving, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So guys, there you have it. We drove this car earlier in the day. What an awesome experience to drive this car. It was a lot different than what I'm used to. It's a lot different than the M3s I've driven. It's a lot different than the Z I own. Some of you guys know I religiously drive a 350Z here at these drift events. And this was a much different experience. So let's get into how it drove. First of all, the power band. That V8 gobs the torque. Never felt the need that it needed more power. At the low end, I didn't really have to clutch kick that much, honestly, unless I was trying to do a maneuver where I needed the clutch in, and then I popped the clutch again, and I always had torque, instantaneous torque throughout the whole power band, all the way to 6,500 RPM. The T5 gearbox isn't too bad. It's a little notchy to get into gears. The owner tells me third gear is a little tall, but first and second gear is perfect for this whole entire course. And it's super awesome, and it just held up. Now this is going through the RX7 stock rear diff, so I believe this is a 3.9 final drive. So there could be some gear ratio changes made that could better utilize the power on this car. But in all honesty, the car felt great. And one thing to keep in mind, guys, these video reviews I'm making, I'm at high elevation. I'm at 4,500 feet roughly, so cars lose about 13% of their horsepower. And that's 13% on a normally aspirated car. Turbo cars, they don't lose as much at this elevation, but this car's naturally aspirated, so keep that in mind. This car is down on power because of the elevation. So let's talk about the chassis on this car. So one thing I did notice on initiation, there was a little bit of understeer, but it was very easy to overcome with a quick clutch kick or a hydro grab. You know, all those techniques work on initiating the car, so it wasn't difficult to initiate by any means. I feel like it might be a little easier with a stickier tire up front. The front tires look like they're Nitto Invos, and they're very well on the end of their life cycle, so I think a stickier 200 treadwear tire in the front might be a good move forward, help with that front flick. But otherwise, it's still very drivable, easy to flick, all kinds of stuff. And a little bit of this factors me getting used to the car as well. When initiated, the car was interesting to drive. One thing I noticed was you didn't have to have as many, you had to be proactive in the sense of keeping the car from sliding and spinning out, because this car was a little easier to spin out than some other cars I've driven. Not to say that it was a nightmare all the time, it's just when you're on that very ragged edge, it was a little easier to kind of cross the limit and spin the car out. But after driving the car a bit and learning, a clutch in and let the car bring itself back, it'll bring it back. So you really need to drive and feather the clutch a little bit to kind of maximize the angle. But once you become proactive enough and understand how the car's dynamics are, it was a blast to drive. And one thing I really liked about this chassis is it felt like no matter where I was on my driving line, I could change where the car was. It felt so easy to manipulate the car and make it drive the rear end out somewhere else. I could, with the throttle and with steering input, I could drive the rear end wherever I wanted it to go. So if I felt like I was far away from the zone, it was easy to reel it back in and put the back further back, or if I needed to go forward more, it was really easy to do all these things, which is a beautiful thing. It did feel a little more ragged edge than a lot of other cars I've driven, like my Z or the M3 E46. But that trade-off is I can really move the car around and change lines. So in a tandem situation when I'm following a different car, this car can really be manipulated to match anyone else's line, which I feel like is the ideal platform when you're competing or doing a lot of tandem driving. So what is the cost to buy a car like this or build a car like this, and what is the cost of ownership? Now, keep in mind this FC3S chassis is becoming a vintage chassis. So not only is the chassis getting harder to find, parts are getting harder to find, niche little things. For example, finding a used door handle for this car is difficult, and when you do find them, they're $300. That's crazy. So keep that in mind if you want to build yourself an FC chassis. Might be one of those situations where you buy two. You buy one for parts and one for the actual car. The Ford V8 that's in this car, relatively cheap. They're about $1,000 all day. They're pretty dead solid, but if you pop one, $1,000 at the junkyard, throw it in, you're good to go and keep ripping. Same thing goes for the transmission. That's a $500 transmission. You blow a trans, you just get another one, throw it in. The Villains angle kit isn't too expensive. It's not egregious or anything crazy or abstract or exotic. So that goes into the factory cost as well. And your other parts like coilovers and stuff like that are relatively on par with the average of the market. $1,000 to $2,000 for coilovers, all that kind of stuff. And everything else is kind of relatively custom, like the bucket seats to put your brackets in, the cage is custom. One thing I like about the FCs is they're different though. They're not a 240. They kind of have that same spirit of a S13 in looks, but I think they look a little cooler. At least this one looks freaking awesome. Like, this is so cool to drive around in and just like see the reflection of the car. Just like a super cool looking car. If you want to stand out a little bit from the average S13, the FC comes into play great there. With the V8 power plant, one thing to consider is the tire usage is a little more. So where my stock Z or the stock M3 46 can go through maybe a pair in a day, this car is probably a set to 2 sets of tires in a day, just because it has way more torque. It's able to put that power down and eat the tires up more. But you have that big V8 with gobs of torque and power, so that's the trade-off you get. But it's still not an unrealistic car. Some 500, 600, 700 horsepower cars, you're killing a set within 3 laps, which is just insane. So this is a good balance of more power and still not killing your wallet on tires. So there you guys have it, guys. The FC3S might not be the most accessible platform, but it's really awesome. And if your heart's in it, you can't go wrong with it. It's just a really cool car. There's plenty of options for power plants, and this one uses a Ford 5.0 V8, right? Which is just super cool, but you can always LS, you could be a rotary guy and keep the rotary going. But there's many different ways to spin your FC3S, and it's a very unique platform that's still very capable and just awesome to drive. And I just can't get over, look how cool that car looks. That car looks wicked. Look at that, it's cool. So anyway, guys, I hope I answered your questions about this car. If you have any other questions about the car, leave them in the comments down below. I'll answer them as best as I can. But I thank you for watching this video, and make sure you stay subscribed, like this video, and we'll have the next video out in a couple weeks.